Today we're going to start our new unit on geometry. And so that we'll talk about vocabulary and terminology. We'll also include diagrams and notations. So what is geometry? Geometry is the branch of math that studies the shapes, size, positions, and dimensions, which means length, width, and height of figures. So we're going to start with the first term, which is a point. And a point is a position or location in space. And we often represent point with exactly what it sounds like. So it would look like a point. And our notation is we usually just say point and then we name it A. Usually an alphabet letter or capital alphabet letter. All right. The next term is line, which is a continuous straight set of points with no endpoints. If we put points endlessly next to each other without any space and continued them on forever, it would make a line. So a line in math, we would write not just what you expect when I say a line, that's what I think of, but we put little arrows on each end to notate that this line goes on forever and ever. It has no endpoints. So sometimes in math, when we have a single line, we can call it line L or line M or whatever we decide, maybe even line 1. But sometimes we have several lines on our paper. And another way to write a line is to show points on the line, not endpoints because it goes on forever, but to name this line AB. And the notation for that, we would put A, B, and then we would put a little small diagram of a line above it. So that would be called line AB. And we could also call it BA because order doesn't matter. When we have the end, or points are, ends that go on forever, line goes on forever, it doesn't matter which order we mention it. Which brings us to a line segment, which is part of a line. A line segment has 2 endpoints. So, for instance, I could write a line that does have endpoints, for instance, and if I can show points more clearly there. And if I called this A and this B, it's different from the line I just made because it does not continue. So we would notate it like this. We put AB again, but this time it would just be a segment. That's the difference between the line and the line segment. Or we could call it BA because, again, order doesn't matter. Our next term is ray. And ray is part of a line that has one endpoint and continues infinitely in one direction. And infinitely means forever. So, for instance, if I drew a ray, and we'll start, and they don't always have to go in this direction. They just happen to be drawing from left to right this way. So I have an endpoint, and then this ray goes on forever in the other direction. But we need another endpoint so we can name it. And this time I'm going to call it E and F. So this particular ray, I would have to say EF. I start with the endpoint, and then I would draw a little picture of a ray, tiny diagram of a ray. I could not call it FE. This one order counts. So the end point is the beginning letter, and you can see if I started here, it does not continue on for an ever and ever going this direction. It has an end point. So I could not start at F and have it be a ray. The way that it's written, it must be from E to F. E is the end point and F is not the end point. So this would be a no. We're going to skip for right now parallel lines and perpendicular lines. We'll come back to them, but we need our 2 next phrases so we can continue with the rest of the lesson. And our next vocabulary word is angle, and an angle is formed by 2 lines, segments, or rays with a common endpoint known as a vertex. So let's look at the vertex. That's our next vocabulary word. A common endpoint of 2 or more rays or line segments. An example of it would be a corner or a point where lines meet. So we're going to go ahead and draw an angle. We'll start out with an angle. Doesn't matter how we draw our angle. And right here is the vertex, the point where they meet. And it doesn't necessarily have to be two rays, but often we see two rays. We could write two line segments. For instance, if I wanted to, I could draw an angle like this. And you notice there's no arrows at the end, so those would be considered line segments. Regardless, where the two line segments or two rays meet, this is called the vertex. So right here is the vertex, where they come together, where they meet. So let's go back to our angle. The way that we name angles, or we list them, for instance, if I made an angle, again, the opening we'll talk about, how far they open we'll talk about later. But if I wanted to, I could call this angle 1. Sometimes inside we put a number. Another way to notate an angle would be just to call it by the vertex. So if I made an angle that looks like this, and I called this point A, then I could call this angle A. And we would name this first one, it would look like this, angle 1, and that's supposed to be a 1. The second angle I drew, we would call angle A, named after the vertex. And we also sometimes like to write angles using 3 alphabet letters. In fact, we're going to discuss this in the coming lesson. So I might call this X, Y, and Z. So 3 points. So we would name it like this. We could call it angle X, Y, Z, or we could say angle Z, Y, X. But what's most important is the vertex is in the center. And our little symbol for an angle looks kind of like a crooked L or an angle itself. So that's the symbol we need to use. Finally, we don't necessarily have a symbol for vertex, but I just wanted to address, if you have several places where lines or angles come together, for instance, a square, then instead of saying vertexes, we call them vertices. So you'll see this word sometimes when there's multiple or more than one vertex. So for today, we'll stop with the vocabulary, and we're going to try to put it into play using for our next lesson, part 2.